Welcome to another edition of the CPaaSAA Talks Leadership Series, where we chat with top leaders from our industry about one of their key career successes and have them share what they learned from the experience in hope that we can gain some key takeaways as we look to help share best practices of what's working out there in the real world. Today, I am joined with my dear friend Cyd Tetro, who has had a whole career around digital transformation, customer experience. And I think this is really timely because here in our industry, here with CPaaS and telecom and everything that's happening in that world, we're moving from all the technology to really focusing in on the customer experience. And so I'm super excited, Cyd, to have you here with me today and spend some time together. So welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm super excited to talk about this. It's a subject that I love.
Absolutely. As I was saying, I think customer experience is becoming such a critical part of all of us as end users, right? It's so easy to change from brand to brand to brand. And so as brands, as companies, we really do need to focus in and understand how we can really deliver that best experience. So I hope as we go through our conversation today that we'll be able to pull some of those things together as we go. On this series, what we like to do is talk about one of your biggest successes and learn from that. So why don't you introduce yourself here a bit and then lead into something that you feel passionate about that you've accomplished in your career?
I've spent my entire career at this intersection of customer experience and innovation and thinking deeply about how do you actually build stuff that people use and then transform businesses because of that and create growth and scale. So that's led me in many places. I've been both in companies that I've started and large organizations. I spent just about 5 years at Disney doing technology commercialization squarely in this space. What are the problems that are going to face the Disney company and how do you create transformation around those? I've also done a couple of my own companies that I've started, one where we could literally make you Iron Man with 3D printing and immersive 3D technology. Other companies where we built an entire storytelling platform that transformed companies in spaces that we're talking about today and created billions of dollars of opportunity for them because they were grounded in this. One of my last companies, we did an acquisition strategy. We acquired 6 companies over 24 months, grew the company by $100 million, both from acquisition and organic revenue. And so for me, in all of these threads of my career, it's always grounded in the customer and it's always grounded in growth and scale, which is, I think, the intersection where you're also spending your time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is the opportunity, particularly for our industry right now, as we make that transition. So with that broad background of success, where would you like to focus today? Tell me a story.
Well, I have lots of stories. I think I'm going to tie actually 2 of them together because I think that they're very strongly there. And I think it's highly relevant to this, which is for me, this moment when I figured out how to fully unlock what it meant to not just tell stories, but to have that drive transformation for users or companies really became this thread that I think are the most fun things that I've done, or the things that I think I've loved the most about what I've been able to build and the things that I've learned across those. When I left Disney, I was, had an opportunity to build a company where we could make you Iron Man. And we built a 3D scanning system that could scan your face. And then we had partnerships with Marvel and Star Wars, Major League Baseball, the NFL, you name a brand, we probably had a partnership with them. But when I think about success, I don't necessarily think about, okay, here's this company and this amazing thing. I think the thing for me that became so powerful about what we did there is the agility under which we addressed problems, we proved them, and we launched them. And for me, that's how you define success, because of the things that you learn there. We had an opportunity where we originally launched the company at Comic-Con in San Diego with Marvel characters. And it was wild. It was wildly successful. Lines are clear down all of the aisles. Everyone wants to become either Iron Man or Captain America or Black Widow or MODOK. And if you watch the latest Thor, then you know who MODOK is. Before that, no one knew. So you could become all of these characters. And then when we left, we got a phone call from Walmart and they asked us, how many stores can you launch in for Superhero September? And Comic-Con was at the end of June. And we're talking like 60 days. And as a small company, we had just barely launched and we were just figuring out, transformation. And at that moment in time, when they called, for me, the question was, well, how many are going to help us get to? And like, what does that look like? And it started this journey that for me has continued to define my career, which was the speed of execution and not missing out of an opportunity that's in front of us because it could transform the business. So we had 60 days. And immediately it became very clear that our product at $140 was not going to work in Walmart, no matter how much they wanted us in there. So we needed a toy line. Well, we didn't know people in the toy industry. And we're like, oh, how do we figure this out? And very rapidly, we learned that we had to go partner with Hasbro in order to have a Marvel product line. We'd never done that before. We'd never been in the ecosystem of that. So we make phone calls, but over the course of 60 days, we ended up with our first toy line that launched inside of Walmart's from having zero product that could actually launch in that to constructing a deal and a partnership that enabled us with Hasbro and Walmart and Marvel to actually launch that, to creating scanners, to solving every problem. And I mean, we created problems like you can't create a custom product out of China that fast. So we had to end up coming back and we actually unpackaged every action figure, popped their heads off, reassembled them with new custom 3D printed heads, and repackaged them and delivered them to customers. We invented all of this, the entire thing, in less than 60 days to launch across the country. And for me, the success isn't like, I mean, we did the product and then we actually were able to build another one in a future iteration, but the success is grounded in the approach that as a leader, I developed to be able to have a team follow, and also in the ability for us to say, there's an opportunity. The thing I knew is we're never getting the call from Walmart again. They're never calling and asking us to do it. And so you run into these opportunities over the course of your career with your teams inside your organizations where you get to decide if you're going to run at it. And it might not turn out and it might fail. That's not the end destination. The destination is the approach that you took there and the learning that you have to create the transformation. Because for us, it transformed the company. The doors that opened, the partnerships that came, the way that we went, that was the entire success that led through that. And that's how I truly think you transform organizations. You forget about the constraints. Every book you ever read would have told you there was no way you could have done that in 60 days. I still don't know how we did that in 60 days, to be completely honest, when I look back on it. Everything would tell you it's not possible. And if you live in that world, you cannot transform organizations because you become fearful of all the reasons that something's not possible, not because it is.
That's brilliant. Too many of us live in a box, right? And so being able to break down those walls and really think of it, as blue sky, right? There's no limits to the mind and what you can do. So
Exactly.
whether you can execute it on or not is always the challenge. I mean, that's the opportunity and the challenge.
Yep.
But I really like that a lot. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, me too.
So
It's actually one of my core principles when I think about teams and leaderships is something you just said, which is, can you live in the art of the possible? If you want to be squarely in digital transformation, like my very top thing is, are you asking yourself the question, what would be possible if? And are you answering it without constraints? I actually asked this to a team the other day. I said, okay, we're thinking about innovation and R&D, and where does this lead us? And how do we think that this creates evolution? And immediately, as people started thinking of ideas, they said, oh, well, we can think of big ideas, but we might be limited by what our sales team can do or how the organization operates. That's not where transformation is found. Transformation is truly found when you say, if none of these things were true, if there were new limits and no constraints, how would we transform the organization? Because if you start there, eventually you get back to execution. But the biggest ideas that change companies come from unconstrained thinking. And you have to train an organization to live in a space sometimes where it can constantly go back to that. And the more you train it, the bigger ideas the company has and the more it actually grows.
Well, I think you're leading into really the key to this, to success around this, right? Is the team. So how do you take these crazy ideas that have no restraints and put that in a way that your team can understand it or follow? How how do you build your team? How do you interact with your team to make that happen?
Ooh, that's a lot of good questions inside of there. So and maybe unpacking a little bit of it. I mean, you have to, I found in the very beginning of the journey, most people are not naturally big thinkers. That's one of the challenges in organizations. We're rewarded and incented in lanes inside of companies. So people execute inside of lanes because it's a safe zone. And it's unsafe to think big because you're also going to fail a couple of times. We're never going to do exactly what we wanted to do as we go. And so I think the first thing is you actually end up needing leaders, and you actually have to develop the skill set where you give them a space to think big and you become really masterful at asking questions to unlock potential. And then you have to give people the space to fail. I think a lot of leaders themselves can't live in a space of the unknowns. And this space of transformation is a space of unknowns. And so the way that you end up going through this, I think when you're going to go on a transformation journey, your number one most important part is to try stuff, to iterate on it, and to communicate broadly and bring people into those conversations with you. And I think so as a leader, if I'm in a small team, my job there is actually much easier than large transformation because inside of a team, if I want someone to think big, I have a million exercises that you can run, right? You have a way that you can orchestrate workshops that take out any of the constraints. You can have people think really big. You can ask them these questions. I mean, sometimes it even starts with this Post-it brainstorm that we do on just simply like one word per Post-it in this rapid iteration over the course of 45 minutes that starts this unconstrained thinking of people that goes into ideations. So there's workshops like that, but it's actually the reinforcement every day. It's how you show up every day that says, so if you take the example, of going into Walmart, we knew this was a big idea. We knew the phone call was never coming before. And then we sequentially started continuing to take things down. And every roadblock that we came into wasn't a barrier. It was something that we just had to manage around, right? It would have been very easy, I promise you. When someone said, hey, Cyd, there's no figures we can make out of China. What are you going to do? For us to be like, oh yeah, there's just no way that takes 6 months. Instead, we're like, maybe what we could do, what happens if can we replace the heads? Did anyone ever ask that question? And then we're like, oh, well, that's a whole big thing. And then we were actually 3D printing heads. No one's ever color matched those. We have to color match them. We have to safety test them. We have to figure out how they fully get assembled. I mean, the list is actually endless in the things that you had to overcome. And if you take just that example of what it means to create a toy line that you disassemble, reassemble, color match, personalize, put back in packaging, and ship to a customer. There was no book that said that you should do that. There's no person who was like, brilliant idea, go after that. And so it's this freedom to say, well, why is that the constraint? Why would I have to do that? We'll wonder if we did this, is that possible? Most people forget to ask the question. Most people just say the answer is going to be no because no one's saying yes. So they don't even step to the plate. And most of the game in transformation is step to the plate and ask someone.
Yeah, I think we spend so much of our time selling what we have that we never stop and actually ask questions. And so whether that's in a sales call, whether that's thinking about a new product, a new market, too often we take what we have, put it in a box, and say this is what it is.
Exactly.
The best salespeople ask questions and then listen, right? And I think this ideation process that you're discussing and describing here has far-reaching effects across lots of different modalities within an organization. So that's key. So as you're working with the team, I mean, clearly time and efficiency has got to be critical in these types of situations. Are there certain tools that you actually use that you find helpful in enabling this kind of thinking or this kind of process that you might point to as another way to facilitate these great results?
Along the way. So I think there's kind of a framework that I would say more than like individual tools. So for me, when you think about transformation, one of the things you're always trying to do in organizations, I think about it, is buy the right to keep going on innovation. And the way that you buy your right to do it is you have to not only keep momentum, but actually be grounded in big challenges an organization is facing. And I think this is sometimes where transformation gets off. In order to be really strong at digital transformation and have the right to use technology, you actually have to understand the business and the biggest levers that can make an impact for the organization in the space that you're trying to go in. Because if you understand at the fundamental level either what they need for growth or the operating levers that create leverage for them, and you ground your ideas in those, then you are solving problems that matter to the business. There's a million problems to solve in the business. Not all are weighted equally. And I think where sometimes people go amiss is they forget that the organization has a problem it has to solve, because it's usually, especially in today's economy, trying to unlock growth. It's trying to unlock how it moves the needle for the organization. Transformation has to align with big unlocks for the
Mm.
organization. And so for me, the framework starts with, did we ask the most powerful questions, and did we listen and hear that the business thinks this matters? If I go put resources on something that the business thinks is too small, then even if I demonstrate success, it will not create the momentum that I want for ongoing transformation. So I always use a framework of solve what the business cares about. And every business has different things it cares about. And a lot of people really struggle with reading the room and identifying what those big levers are. You've got to ground yourself in becoming an expert as what matters and asking enough questions. As an example, I had a team very recently who had been focused on this really great 3D problem in a merchandising space for a product that was highly profitable. So if you could put more products in this space, it would clearly have a higher profit margin. The problem is the percentage that was of the business is less than 3%. Well, the other big problem in merchandising was 95% of the problem. And so by spending time on just the 3%, the needle doesn't move fast enough with
Mm.
the way that you drive adoption. And so why aren't we solving the problem in the 95, which buys us the right to learn things to go do the other, versus fighting for the smaller space? And I think that's a constant problem you have. So you got to start with a very big problem. And then you also have to be very clear on who's the customer, how are we going to measure success, how does the business measure success, and have that constantly ingrained in the conversation that you're going after. Because there's a lot of solutions, but what you're going after is this the customer? And if we do this, this is meaningful to the organization. And then how do you rapidly take down the barriers that you need to validate that continue to give you the right to move forward? And you have to do it with speed and agility in an imperfect world. Sometimes it looks like a bunch of mock-up screens of like, hey, this is what we think. Because one of the other most important tools, I think, in transforming businesses is your ability to visualize the impact
Mhm.
you're creating. So I think people cannot see things. Most people are not visual. Like you tell them a story, it didn't shape in their mind, and they didn't say, I see the impact for the organization. But that's what motivates people. We need to see that if we go and do this, that this would be the experience that transforms. And I spent a lot of time building visual storytelling solutions
Mm.
for companies on transformation. I can promise you it's the number one most important thing to do. If you do nothing
Mm.
else, you have to create the visual story so that people can see, touch, feel, and then decide what to do as part of it. And if you do not visualize for them, then you're talking about pipes and wires and business cases, and no one actually sees what changed in a business. That's why technology struggles to sell. We sell pipes, wires, we sell lots of infrastructure that's like, go connect this API, and now we have this magical identity. It's not because we're doing that is the power of the business. The power of the business is the outcome that it drove. It's driving more revenue, it's reducing cost, it's increasing opportunity. That's everything that we do is tied to some outcome of the business. And if you can't visualize that, then people don't understand how to quantify it.
So true. So true. Um, you bring up a good point though, because I think as you're building these concepts, how do you then communicate both downstream and upstream, right? Because I think clearly the budget's going to come from a board of directors or the C-suite. Um, how do you communicate these big ideas upstream to get um, the approvals that you need to move forward? How do you communicate, as well as it sounds like too, on a daily basis, you have to really have your own team focused in on what needs to be done. So let's touch on both those points. I think those are really critical for success in these new ideas.
So when you think about budget, the reason it's so imperative that you align with the big, most important things of the organization that it needs to solve is that's where budget falls. People are willing to fund the big problems. If you're trying to get budget because you're describing something at such a like granular state and it's not actually tied to the big problems, or it's such a small problem that the executive team along the way is like, yeah, like interesting problem, could be helpful, not big enough. That's where your budget constraints come into. So you want budget unlocked, you go to the big problems the organization needs to solve, or even the smaller problems, but that have huge unlocks. Things that people are talking about, to your point of listening, the more that you listen to how people talk and the more that you understand how they're making decisions, the better you articulate the thing that you're going to go solve in context of that. You have to do that. That's how you unlock budget every time. And then secondarily, to your commentary on the team, you have to structure a team with the speed and agility and communication so that people feel like they're getting brought along. So let's say we get the budget approved and people are like, amazing, it's going to transform the organization. Go after doing that. And then now our job is execution. Well, if anyone ever comes back to us and said, hey, where's the update? What's the status of that? How's it going? We probably failed on communication. Our job is to set a roadmap, to set clear expectations, to tell people problems we're taking down, to even let them see the visuals that we think we're moving towards and let them put their fingerprints on it so that as we develop something, they're coming along in the journey. The most important thing you do in transformation is not invent something in a silo and then expect people to think it's amazing. It's that you put the fingerprints of the organization on it from the very beginning and you bring people with you. You want them to have, if you have their buy-up from day one and they feel like you're listening to them and they feel like you're even talking to them, even if they don't agree, they will start to feel like they're coming along. And that's how, when you get to the place that you're done, you actually get the right to implement.
That's key. And I think that's where diversity comes into play too, right? Is you have different experiences, different backgrounds, different fingerprints that can really impact a project. I think too often particularly in our industry, we get stuck on kind of having the same people in the room. And so you end up with the same answers, even though you're asking
Yeah.
the questions. And so I know that you've done a lot of work on that front as well. Maybe give us a little bit of a side story on what you're doing with women in tech here in the state of Utah, because I think there's a lot of lessons that you've probably learned there and how teams can be built and worked on as well.
I mean, you know, right? I'm a big believer in you put diverse voices around the table because I think it's how you solve big problems. Because when you have big problems or transformation, to your point, it's very hard for the same groups of people to see and like be able to solve big problems consistently. So you really do have to think about, you know, big, interesting problems. You know, so I started out in computer science, right? I'm like one of 3 women in my graduating computer science class. I've spent most of my career inside of, you know, technology and ecosystems like that didn't have diverse voices. And over a decade ago, I actually found this opportunity to say, hey, maybe we should increase the number of women in technology and we should create an organization that's focused on that. I think a couple of interesting outcomes of having done this for now over a decade is my network looks vastly different. Thousands of women I've now met that I never would have met had I not spent time doing this. And what it also did, it changed my perspective on everything, on not just what I expected from leadership from me or from my leaders, but how I show up as a leader, the challenges that people are facing, the ways that people solve problems, the barriers that people overcame to sit in seats. When you appreciate that broad perspective, you actually bring it to your problem solving tables. And then it starts to change or unlock. You actually get better at the questions of what would be possible if, oh, wait, I saw someone tell a story over here of doing these things, or someone actually did this innovation. How cool is that? I mean, the broader that you expand networks and the broader that you appreciate that everyone has something to offer and you give people the freedom to come in and work on those from those perspectives, the more likely you are to uncover things that are transformative. You just can't keep doing the same thing. I promise you get the same results. You want something different, you change what you're starting to do right now. And it also comes from the talent you put around the table.
No, that makes total sense. Makes total sense. So within this personal journey of yours, is there a certain opportunity, I won't say the word failure, but an experience that has taught you something, not from the positive results, but something that happened along the way that was unexpected, and how you got through that issue, and maybe what you learned from that?
So there's kind of two things that come to mind in like the kind of failure spot. So I'm going to actually give you both. One that became a lesson that has become part of my constant leadership that I think has enabled the transformation, and then one where I was like, I don't actually know how we're going to manage through this. The very early in my career, as I came out of graduate school, I had jumped into a product management role, and I don't know what I was like 6 months in. I remember my VP coming to me and he's like, Cyd, you have to stop talking in meetings. You have to stop. You're saying way too much. You do not need to talk anymore. And it's one of those moments where you pause and you get to reflect and you get to make decisions for how you then become different in the future. Because your options are to either say, he's totally wrong. Like, what is he talking about? That's criticism that I don't need. Of course, I'm saying everything right. Or you get to say, maybe I am showing up in a way that people are perceiving me. And there is something I need to change in the way that I show up inside of organizations. For me, it became a very defining moment in changing my journey for how I thought about feedback for myself and going forward. And that feedback mechanism has been reinforced when I started getting heavy into product validation. And, I've done thousands of product validation meetings with users. One of the keys to that was something we were talking about earlier. How do you ask questions and listen? And what I also learned from that journey is everything was like post mortem was about feedback. So we'd step out of the room and we'd be like, well, what did we do good? What did we do bad? What should I change in myself? How should I show up differently inside of that conversation? And from that moment that I got the conversation that said, stop talking so much, to this evolution of my career, the one thing that I try to do pretty constantly is reflect on how I'm showing up and what I need to change. And I constantly ask that. Like, I'll walk out of an investor pitch meeting, I'm the first one to say, like, do you think that went well? What should I have done differently? Could we have gotten a different outcome if we have done that? What did you guys think? Or I'll even reflect on myself and I'll say, yeah, I don't really think I did a great job stepping out of that. I really missed this opportunity and I should have done this. And what I've found is that if you can embrace that you're not perfect and that you're going to let other people criticize you and give you feedback, then you become so much better. And all of the people around you like step into a space of expecting feedback, which I think is a fundamental requirement for transformation, but is very different. I had one of my execs on my last team. He worked, in public companies for a very long time. And he's like, Cyd, I have never walked out of a meeting where a CEO has said to me, do you think I should have done something different? Like, give me your feedback. He said ever in his entire career. And he's like 40 years into his career. That tells you something about how we expect people to show up. But for me, it changes and defines who I am. So for me, that became a fundamental learning. And then to a very quick story just on failure. At one point in one of the companies that I was building, we had a really big launch that was coming up, that was launching in October, headed into holiday. It was 2 weeks before launch. And I got a phone call on a Friday night at 5:00 from my largest partner to finish this launch. And they told me they were backing out. And they said, we're not showing up, Cyd. We know you're your hardware provider. It doesn't matter. We're pulling out. And we had just signed the contract for this national rollout 2 weeks before that had taken us 8 months to solidify. 40 departments, every component. And I came in literally on a Friday and 5:00 and they're like, Cyd, we're out. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, okay, company relies on me, big customer contracts, employees, like all of those things are sitting there, hinging on those. And it was colliding with the same time as we were doing fundraising. So this entire thing is like this perfect storm of raising capital. I've got, a co-founder who's being kind of weird in the closing the round thing. I've got a big deal that's monumental and definitive or defining for the company that we sign. I've got my largest vendor who pulls out, and all of this happens in this same exact moment. There are a couple of things that I think about in the failure side. one of those things is like, do you really have people bought off on the journey that you're going on so they don't create disruption like what was happening in our fundraising side? I don't think I actually could have predicted the failure on the hardware vendor to have not shown up. I don't actually know how, retrospect, what I could have done, but we showed up. But I will tell you what the outcome was. So we showed up on Monday, and I played seriously every Hail Mary I could possibly think of from every person we could possibly call. We show up on Monday, and I told the team everything. I'm like, look, we got this call at 5 o'clock. They're backing out. It might mean that this entire thing is off. I have no idea. But can we brainstorm every idea that could possibly solve this problem and start making phone calls? So we came up with like 35 ideas, and we literally started making phone calls. And I said, it doesn't matter if we fail, let's just try. Well, at the end of the day, we actually ended up only missing our final install by one. It took 150 friends and family members and some really great people who stepped into the space of helping us fund those assets in a way that we never thought was going to actually be possible to finish the install. But there was a whole circumstances of a perfect storm that didn't end up looking like I thought it would. Funding came in an entirely different way that had a different impact on the organization than I thought it would. The install, like we did it in a totally different way, which was ended up probably being a better way, but was far more complicated with extensive overhead for the organization. And, you know, in retrospect, would I've done it again? Probably, but it was a very imperfect path that led us there. And I think parts of it sent the company on a next good trajectory, and parts of it created lots of challenges as it moved forward.
Well, I think you've tied a couple of key points together in that story, in the sense that as obstacles appear, as we have these challenges, it becomes a blue sky opportunity again, right? Knock down the walls, figure out, there's no restraints here because what we were planning isn't going to work. And so it sounds like that has been a common theme that you've been able to tap back into in a really positive way. I really appreciate all the stories that you've shared, and a lot of great experience and wisdom that I think we can learn from. I love the idea of no restraints. I think too often we are in that box, and we're in a really interesting time in history where there's never been so much innovation, so much technology available, experience. There's just it's almost unlimited in what we have access to now. And so I think there's never been a better time to ask that question of what is the art of the possible. And so I think that is a really critical, best practice that you've clearly, started, early in your career, but the time is now for organizations, no matter what industry you're in, to really ask that question, because you can change things in a way that you never could have before. I think the other thing that I learned from you is, though, that you have to ask those questions, right? And you have to give people, your team, the space to fail, in the sense that if someone comes up with a big idea and then you fire them a week later because they didn't execute on it, you've now killed the whole culture. And so those clearly have to go hand in hand, I think, to see that success.
Or the people who, like, something goes wrong and everyone's mad at everyone, or they're, attacking them or making them feel like, so much of transformation is what you're saying. It's the freedom to explore, right? Positive and failures, like, they're going to happen.
They are. And I think you gave some really practical advice, in the sense you used the line, buy the right to keep going, right? So I think too often you have those that are dreamers, and those that have the vision, and they can articulate that, but there's a roadmap to get there, right? And so the idea of having a roadmap or milestones along the way that you continually buy the right to continue, I think also fits into that feedback loop in communication with your team, right? So whether that's your boss or whether that's who's working with you, tying those two together is I think important. It gives the practical day-to-day roadmap of what the team needs to work on. And then
I
I
couldn't agree
really,
more. I think the more you communicate, the the more powerful you are. I think people, especially in transformation spaces, are like, we're the innovation team. And so they go into this room and then they think about innovation and then they pop out and they're like, look at all the amazing things we did. But the problem is they didn't bring the company along with them. And they didn't hear from all the people who actually live the problem so that their
mm,
fingerprints are embedded. And then they also think that you have to have the full solution out. But innovation is incremental. Like if you have these big ideas, to like pull them along, sit down and say, guess what? 3 weeks, we're coming back to you. What we're going to do is we're going to show you where this is headed. And then people are going to put their fingerprints on it. And then you're going to keep moving and you're going to do it as fast as you possibly can with as much communication as you possibly can.
right. And it sounds like the secret sauce to that is the visualization part, right? So the more that we're able to help those around us visualize that vision, break that down into incremental parts, but even those need to be visualized.
That's right.
That I think that's when I've looked at your success and your careers over the years. That's been the difference. Is your ability to tell the story and visualize it allows people to spend more money to take that risk with you because they can
That's
see it
right.
now, right? So visualization was a key point. And then
Absolutely.
that personal feedback loop is awesome advice. You know, I think the principle of humility and in knowing that you know there's other people around you that have experience, knowledge, or even intuition sometimes, right? That
That's
they have
right.
a feeling of what could have been different or better. And so again, a very strong cultural piece as you build
That's
your
right.
team to be able to kind of facilitate that. And if the leader's willing to do it, then that opens themselves up
That's
for
right.
their leader to then give them that critical feedback that might
I
really
agree.
make an impact on them. So um, this has been time very well spent. I really appreciate the insights that you've shared. Um, I'm excited to have you more engaged with our membership here at CPaaSAA. Our goal is to take a lot of this experience that you're sharing and be able to bring that into a very technology focused industry and start to make that digital transition, make those changes. And so we're excited to have you along for the ride and helping us create that visualization that I think everyone's going to need.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think it's the work that you're doing in the group that you brought together. Like, there's huge transformation happening in this space. And what's so cool about that is this idea that not only is transformation happening, but you're at this right perfect moment in time that if you can visualize, if you can show the impact, you can create acceleration in creating the transformation because everyone feels it. Right. And
yep.
then, but there's nuances to different businesses and models and the ways that it shows up. But I really think there's a perfect moment in time for this industry that ties together what transformation looks like with that story and visualization of the true impact of it that unlocks the speed of execution.
No, you're absolutely right. And as we look to go from about a $20 billion industry in this last year to what we expect to be $100 billion just in the next 5 or 6 years, that's the opportunity for growth. And those that are able to kind of cross that chasm with that visualization, delivering it from the customer, so top down rather than bottom up, is going to have a huge advantage in this race to the future. So excited to have you along for the journey and introduce you to our broader membership here through our podcast. And we'll be talking again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me and for spending the time and for all of your friendship and partnership through the years as we both have been working on transformation in various industries. So thank you.
You're welcome. I love it. All right. Thanks, Cyd, and we'll be talking again soon.
Thank you.